The city woke, screaming. Night fires glowed on the steppe, and shadows too broad for wolves flickered across the fields. By dawn, every home in Khwarazm knew terror would come for them next. Mongol psychological warfare. For centuries, that phrase rippled through every borderland and market, dark tales recounted by trembling travelers who had seen miracles and massacres in the same vanished night. It was the 13th century, a world ballooning with ambition and blood. To the east lay the open steppe, where thunderheads gathered and horses ran farther than the horizon. No fortress was truly safe. At the center of the storm stood Temujin, Genghis Khan to some, the destroyer to all. He had survived betrayal, exile, and slaughter, vowing to forge fear into a weapon no enemy would withstand. In 1218, a governor in Otrar betrayed Mongol trust, killing Genghis Khan's envoy and defying the expected rules. With one beheading, the world shuddered, and Genghis plotted an answer measured not in battles, but in dread. Merchants whispered rumors ahead of the Mongols, an invisible army, a flood of horsemen, a presence that killed crops, poisoned rivers, turned children old and kings into shadows. Panic mounted ahead of their approach. The Mongols didn't just invade, they vanished. Night after night, their scouts circled city walls, setting false campfires. Sleep fled from defenders' eyes, nerves frayed, and gates crumbled before an arrow was ever shot. Inside Khwarazm, silence reigned. The bravest guards checked windows twice. Mothers hushed children who cried at distant drums, and priests offered coins for mercy in languages the gods no longer heard. Genghis Khan's messengers demanded surrender, obedience, or annihilation. There would be no negotiation, no mercy for resistance. Behind each ultimatum was the reputation of myth. To resist was to die before one's time. When the outer settlements fell, there was no looting. The Mongols left bodies unburied, sending survivors fleeing with horror-bloated stories. The panic spread faster than arrows or fire, leaving cities hollowed out by fear. Travelers described towns that simply gave up, opening their gates before Mongol banners could be seen. Invaders would accept loyalty sometimes, but burn the hesitant, ensuring terror seeded the soil for 100 miles more. In each ruined street, the aftermath haunted. The wind carried no laughter. Burnt timbers pointed like accusations at empty sky. Those left alive became warnings to neighbors of what happened to doubters. Persian chroniclers tried to tally the dead, but numbers failed to describe the void the Mongols left behind. Whole towns vanished from maps, erased not just from memory but from hope. Genghis Khan's campaign became a new kind of war, psychological before physical, relentless in its unpredictability. Resistance seldom saw a battle. More often, cities fell to despair, led to destruction by their own collective terror. In Central Asia, defenders spread news to one another by torchlight. Mongols never forgot an insult, never left a rebel alive. The idea of mercy died in the dark, long before the armies arrived. Some survivors wandered as refugees for years, carrying memories more corrosive than burns. Children grew up with stories of voices in the night, of gardens choked with skulls and rivers that ran backwards. The Mongol practice of dividing armies, sending 50 horsemen to circle, vanish, return from another direction, overwhelmed the logic of seasoned commanders. Walls no longer meant safety, outposts only marked new vectors for dread. No city escaped the web of intimidation. Mongol leaflets, written in a dozen languages, were nailed to tree trunks. Surrender now. Open your gates. Resist, and none shall survive. Your fate is sealed in advance. Poisoned wells stood as memorials to stubbornness. Markets that resisted were transformed into open graves. Messenger heads sent to neighbors told the story more convincingly than any prayer could. Surrendered towns were sometimes spared, but Mongol spies ensured others saw the price of disobedience. Sometimes the spared became betrayers, guiding the next army to the next holdout, continuing the cycle of terror. Sometimes Mongols allowed only one witness to survive, a broken prisoner, sent home with eyes full of horror, tasked to recount everything to his people. Such living warnings achieved more than any army at the gates. For every city that resisted, a graveyard grew. The survivors' whispers turned into curses, trading talk for haunted memories that sowed the seeds of surrender in distant rulers' hearts. No city trusted its walls after the Mongols. The turning wheel of the Mongol tactics, strike, retreat, feint, and circle, heightened confusion until entire garrisons broke ranks just to escape their own imaginations. Genghis Khan cultivated ambiguity, sometimes accepting tribute, sometimes burning the loyal, sometimes vanishing altogether. Planners and generals realized the only prediction was unpredictability, and that unpredictability itself became a form of siege. The Mongol army's speed was legendary horses coursing across river and mountain, arriving days earlier than any enemy's messenger could warn. Paranoia replaced logic in every fortress. Refugees told stories of Mongol drums' deep pulses echoing through the night, reminding those awake that annihilation preferred to come when spirits were weakest and hope was already spent. Mongol shamans played a key role. They directed psychops, conjuring omens, stage managing sky fires, sending flocks of captive birds over city walls with scrolls tied to their feet, messages of doom written in the conquered tongue. Teamwork between spies and shamans blurred reality. Some cities awoke to rumors that horses could fly, or that Mongols had thunder weapons capable of shaking heaven itself. Terror warped reality. When a city's ruler hesitated, Mongol agents slipped inside with rumors and bribes, stoking paranoia among advisors. Loyalty unraveled. Defenders accused each other, weakened by suspicion before the first arrow was loosed. Mongol warriors often left certain neighborhoods untouched, knowing survivors would interpret such mercy as an omen, divine warning, or just a thin thread of hope, fraying as the days grew more desperate. Guards could barely sleep. Scouts reported seeing phantom armies, thousands where only hundreds existed. Bonfires flickered all night, leaving defenders to wonder if they faced 2,000 or 10,000. Mongols employed psychological feints, riding in circles to raise dust clouds, increasing campfires, sounding horns at midnight to mimic reinforcements. The campaign against sleep wore down resistance as surely as any sword. The Khan's warnings often preceded him. Envoys appeared at gates with chilling offers: unconditional surrender and survival, or total ruin. Those who resisted soon lost their leaders, their courage sucked into a void of uncertainty. Mongol messengers rode relentless loops between besieged towns, promising a quick, merciful death only to the wise. The unwise saw their streets lined with stakes, blood, and the 6-day mark of total remembrance. If you fight, you die. If you flee, the world forgets your name. If you serve, you survive. Mongol records held oaths that echoed through broken halls long after their armies had departed. When the Mongol horde finally arrived, it seemed ghosts had conjured them. Horses marched in eerie silence, dust hung unmoving in the air, and birds fled or died upon the city's edge. Those who watched from towers read horror into faces. Mongol helmets, animal hides, strange sigils and banners made warriors look part human, part demon, fear incarnate, cultural nightmare honed to sharpness. Mongol siege tactics were ruthless but always intentional. Human shields, captive peasants, driven before the horde were used to break defender morale, forcing the defenders to kill their own kind or surrender. The Mongols excelled in planning for psychological collapse, spreading rumors of impossible numbers, of cities already fallen, assuring messengers would tell tales that traveled faster than truth, multiplying fear daily. Sometimes, Mongols waited as hunger gnawed at the besieged. They let the city suffer, allowing panic to tear families apart until all hope vanished. In time, even the bravest defenders questioned their leaders. Did the Khan possess new poisons? Was it true Mongol archers never missed? Despair grew deeper than the city's wells. As negotiation failed, Mongols catapulted the decapitated heads of previous envoys into courtyards. Each skull bore a chilling message: resist, and this fate becomes your children's inheritance. The Mongols' use of biological warfare, flinging plague-ridden corpses over walls, turned survivors against each other. The very air became suspect, breeding rumors that death itself now served the conqueror. It's said that, before storming a city, Genghis Khan paced the perimeter in silence, letting his captains watch as the enemy descended into helpless guessing and terror. Days bled into nights. Some defenders prayed for an attack, anything to end the waiting. But the Mongols were patient, unconcerned by the fatigue or hunger eating away at their enemies' hope. When gates fell, resistance collapsed. Mongols rode silently down avenues, slaughtering the willful and sparing the meek. Their discipline made the massacre all the more methodical. Genghis Khan ordered consequences for betrayal without hesitation. Surrender guaranteed survival that day, but those who lied or turned coat found none. Mongols struck inland, making examples of traitors in front of stunned children. Songs followed Mongol armies' lamentations of towers that fell, crops burned to ash, rivers clogged with corpses. Even nature seemed to turn away from the horror that came on hooves. Those who survived Mongol conquests faced psychological scars deeper than wounds. Children lost words to describe what they'd seen. Elders met silence with silence, leaving empty houses to outnumber the living. Cities filled with ghosts became cautionary tales. One by one, Khans across Asia and Europe wrote letters of surrender, certain that life under Mongol demands beat obliteration 10 times over. In centuries that followed, travelers paused at ruined cities where Mongol banners once waved. Among the ruins, wildflowers grew in patterns that some called curses, others called warnings for the future. Mongol legend outlived their horses. Long after the empire fractured, their psychological conquest haunted warlords and priests, shaping how men everywhere talked of terror, negotiation, and total war. The Mongols' power wasn't only in the blade, but in their mastery of uncertainty. Fear spread on saddles, in marketplaces, in bedtime stories, and the nightmares that followed. To the Mongols, mercy was not a right but a tactic. Spartiate when it inspired loyalty, relentless when it deterred resistance. Every decision wrote new rules for domination. In cities that accepted obedience, Mongol governors watched closely. Any hint of dissent or rebel plotting was met with swift and public correction. Street executions replaced rumors, driving the lesson deeper into memory. Across the Silk Road, merchants spoke in cautious voices of Khanate diplomacy. Fortified towns weighed alliance versus resistance, knowing Mongol gifts hid sharp teeth beneath silk. Mongol envoys traveled with small retinues, confident that their reputation alone would grant access to palaces. Their sight meant policy reconsidered, alliances shifted, boundaries faded as survival eclipsed pride. Royalty, once proud and isolationist, began exchanging tribute for peace. Mongols introduced new hierarchies. Loyalty to Khan ranked above all ancestral debts or histories. Tradition broke beneath fear's hammer. Rulers wore Mongol-inspired armors, kept steppe horses, adopted Mongol customs. Those who adapted survived, sometimes thriving in the New World Order, a lesson enforced by unrelenting consequence. Yet, in private, even vassal kings never truly slept. Their dreams brimmed with the fear of raven banners, returning of old promises renewed with blood and smoke. Of the cycle beginning again. The lessons of Mongol fear weren't forgotten. Generals studied their surprises, how a rumor, if cultivated, outpaced 1,000 arrows, and left even fortified walls trembling in futility. Folk tales twisted fact and terror. Mothers threatened unruly children. Obey, or the Mongol ghosts will ride in moonlight and carry your soul away before morning. In the West, Mongol scouts became a mythic force unseen eyes, whispers in the grass. Cities built taller towers, posted extra guards, but dread always climbed higher. Asian steppe songs honored the name Khan, but whispered prayers in ravaged villages cursed it to sides of terror's coin, inseparable now from memory itself. Mongol diplomacy was simple but chilling. Obedience brought protection. Resistance ensured extinction. Kingdoms balanced their pride against the memory of smoldering ashes and emptied streets. Genghis Khan's generals, like Subotai and Gib, became notorious for inventiveness. False retreats, night attacks, and the systematic spread of enemy confusion. Fame spread before them like wildfire. Even when outnumbered, the Mongols prevailed by shattering their enemies' trust in reason. Too often, valor meant feeding the legend rather than defeating it. When a city stood, Mongols sometimes feigned departure. Defenders celebrated then in darkness. The horde returned, striking from another side, breaking morale in a single night. Mongols were masters of psychological adaptation, shaping their approach to each society. Where enemies respected omens, shamans conjured warnings. Where logic reigned, spies sowed evidence of overwhelming odds. Emissaries recited stories of distant destruction, counted off the names of vanished cities, and reminded rulers that pride had no resurrection, only the privilege of a silent grave. Geography rarely deterred the horde. Mongol engineers built bridges, drained moats, and when rivers couldn't be crossed built myths that river gods themselves knelt to the Khan. Borderland survivors, when allowed, returned home, forever changed. They became living sermons, relics of what happened to those who doubted Mongol intent and power. Even false rumors spread by enemies worked to the Mongols' advantage. The mere suspicion that the Khan's wrath approached caused markets to collapse, alliances to unravel, and armies to disband unseen. Mongol tolerance of different religions was not out of kindness, but calculation. The more faiths they allowed, the more spies and informants they collected among the frightened faithful. Sometimes, survivors switched sides, offering local secrets to the Mongols to escape certain death. The empire's true conquest lay in making submission appear as the only sane choice. At victory feasts, Mongol leaders handed out spoils to loyalists and served warnings to emissaries. Remember this night when you next hear hoofbeats across the plain. Mongol psychological warfare didn't always require swords. Drought, diverted rivers, and terrified horses stabled at city gates did more to unhinge societies than years of open combat. Chroniclers from Persia to Rus recounted how panic roamed faster than the Mongol cavalry itself. Rumors, omens, the feeling that the next moment would decide a nation's fate. The greatest students of the Mongol era did not study swordplay. They studied rumor-mongering, subtlety, and silence. The art of breaking faith without ever bending a blade. Even centuries later, the site of a Mongol victory felt haunted. No birds sang. No wells tasted fresh. The mist seemed heavier, as though memory itself grew roots in the earth. In rare moments of quiet, old survivors confessed to their children. It was the waiting, the not knowing, that hurt most. Fear itself outlasted famine, fire, and steel. Historians marvel that Genghis Khan's greatest general was terror itself, an army that cost nothing to feed and grew greater with every unanswered rumor. The legend of Mongol psychological warfare soon crossed continents, inspiring new empires to mimic their methods, and teaching that victory begins in the mind before any blade is ever drawn. Poets composed verses about the Night of 1,000 Hooves, painting the Mongols as death given human form. These stories blurred reality and myth, making resistance seem not just foolish but impossible. In cities that fell, rituals arose to ward off returning Mongol spirits. Gates decorated with bones, lanterns left burning for months, priests chanting to drive away memories that would not die. Scholars later called it total warfare of the soul. Mongol generals learned the mind of a city could be conquered weeks before the walls actually fell. Mongol engineers left behind bridges and siegeworks, but their permanent monument was psychological. The sense, even in peace, that disaster lurked just over the farthest horizon. Empires that survived did so by internalizing Mongol lessons. Military academies debated how to defeat the rumor as much as the assault, a new kind of war, born from the ashes. In the centuries following, Mongol storm tactics showed up in whispers among traders, ruses by pirates, and even the silent marches of revolutionary armies. Terror, once invented, never vanished completely. The haunting legacy, surrender bought one kind of survival. Resistance purchased legend at the price of everything. The stones of every captured city bore witness to this impossible choice. Mongol ambassadors continued to bear strange gifts. On each diplomatic mission, gifts were symbols and signals. A single arrow wrapped in black silk, a wordless reminder that war loved silence. Sometimes, Mongol tactics backfired as terror pushed people into desperate alliances. Yet even then, half the battle remained. One doubt plagued every coalition, hampering unity before any sword rang out. Survivors who converted to Mongol service became masters of intimidation in their own right. What was once fear became currency, passed down through titles, marriages, and threats. Rulers whose ancestors endured spoke in riddles, reminding subjects of old Mongol warnings, lessons that traveled like dusk, returning when pride again threatened to blind. Mongol psychological warfare proved that control lies as much in stories as in armies. A myth outlasts a massacre. A rumor can crack stone. Through the fragments of burned manuscripts and oral histories, we glimpse the real secret. Those who shape fear shape history itself. Command armies and dreams by controlling expectation. Today, archaeologists rediscover Mongol bones. The voices of the conquered rise in the silent echoes, not just of cruelty, but of power wielded through the imagination of terror. Reflecting now, the ruins remind us, it was not only the Mongol sword that toppled cities, but the invisible hand of dread that loosened the mortar long before the enemy arrived. Mongol psychological warfare was never just about war, it was the creation of a ghost empire. An invisible web enmeshing friend and foe alike, a lesson written in fear's handwriting. And so, as new empires rise and old ghosts ride silent across our nightmares, one question remains: which will outlive us, the walls we build, or the legends that dare them to fall?